I'm talking about this not because I'm scared. I'm talking about this not because I think the worst case scenario is in front of us and is inevitably going to happen. This is not doomsday. This is not the apocalypse. It's not incorrigibly inevitable like Thanos is. We don't have bad things in store. Instead, we're talking about this just because I understand its importance. People have been asking me to talk about this, give my 2 cents, talk about why this actually is important, and that's why we're talking about it here today. Not because I fear for the future, but because it's only necessary to bring it up. Let's talk today about Judd Brackett and the Vancouver Canucks and the rumors that have surrounded both of these parties. Now, if you don't know who Judd Brackett is, he's kind of a superhero. He's a hero in disguise. Walking down the street, walking on the draft stage, most people wouldn't be able to recognize Judd Brackett, but believe me, he is a hero for this team. Judd Brackett today is the Vancouver Canucks Director of Amateur Scouting, and he's been in that role ever since 2015-16. Before that, though, he started out with the Vancouver Canucks in 2008-2009 as an amateur scout. So he's been with this Vancouver Canucks team for 10 years, and he's been the director of amateur scouting for 5 years now. What that means is he's the guy that controls the majority of our scouting process. Now, don't get me wrong, Jim Benning is ultimately the GM, he's the guy who makes the main decisions on who to draft guys, but Jim Benning doesn't have the time to go out and see 100, 200 players out there every year. So, that's where the scouting staff comes in. The scouting staff comes in, they talk to Benning, they talk to Judd Brackett, they say, okay, I watched this game here, Rimouski versus, Chicoutimi. These are the players that stood out to me, this guy, these guys are eligible for the draft, this is what they do well, this is what they don't do well, this is why we should take them, this is why we shouldn't take them, etc. These are the conversations that go on between the scouts, the director of amateur scouting, and Jim Benning. Judd Brackett is the main cog. He sees a lot of games, and he scouts a lot of players, and he's got an eye for talent that's been exposed ever since the Vancouver Canucks started drafting these really good players all the way back a few years ago. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Judd Brackett's entire scouting career with the Vancouver Canucks has been great. 2008, 2009, 2010, our scouting wasn't all that amazing. We drafted some guys that weren't all too special. But ever since Judd Brackett took over the Director of Amateur Scouting role back in 2015-16, we've been getting players that a lot of people have been deeming are pretty good picks. Judd Brackett is the guy that most people deem responsible for the U.S. college NCAA guys. So Brock Boeser was kind of in that realm because he was a USHL player back in 2015 when Judd Brackett was just a scout. Adam Gaudette was in that same kind of boat. We also have some other players down the line, like William Lockwood, Jack Rathbone, Tyler Madden, and most recently, Jack Malone and Aidan McDonough. These are the guys that a lot of people are saying Judd Brackett is responsible for because Brackett is known for being a guy who scouts out the US leagues. Furthermore, as the director of amateur scouting, he's the one that controls the bulk of these conversations that go on with these players. So, you could kind of see the importance with Judd Brackett. We've built a pretty good prospect pool over the past few years, and a lot of that does have to do with this guy. Not just because Jim Benning is Jim Benning, but because this guy is the informant to Jim Benning that allows the GM to understand the value in these players. You could see it in the behind-the-scenes draft videos from 2017 and 2018. Judd Brackett was beside Benning the entire time, telling him, okay, this guy's good, we need to take this guy. And a lot of these times, the players end up being very valuable. So you can understand the concern when the media starts talking about Judd Brackett and how his contract is indeed expiring later this year. And there's even more concern talking about whether or not Judd Brackett is even going to return. Now again, phrasing what I said at the beginning of the video, I'm not scared. I think Brackett is probably going to stay. But for the sake of bringing up the news and talking about what people are talking about, let's go over what Elliotte Friedman said here on Sportsnet 650. The fit is important in what we're talking about here, the extension. What is the role the Canucks see for Brackett, and what do they want him to do? And what does Brackett want to do? The thing I've heard is there may not be an agreement in terms of what the organization sees and what Judd Brackett sees. If they can't come to a situation where they're going to work to see eye to eye and come to a fit, just like a player who has the option to become a UFA, so does an executive. How many executives do you know that walk away from a situation and say, I want to become a free agent by choice? Not many. But if you're not happy in your situation, and that's what you want to do, I don't see why it's any different than a player doing it. So, Elliotte Friedman is bringing up the idea that there is a little bit of different calibrations in terms of how Judd Brackett sees his future and how the Vancouver Canucks see Brackett's future. Which is why he brings up the idea that he could potentially leave as a free agent and eventually become an executive with another team. Now, it's actually crazy because there are tons of discussions going on about this, and I'm pretty sure Elliotte Friedman even talked about this on Sportsnet's Hockey Night in Canada panel. I'm not too sure on that. I'm pretty sure I watched it one day. I don't know the validity of it actually being from him, but there's chatter amongst the league that Judd Brackett is a pretty valuable guy. And some NHL teams would be willing to even give Judd Brackett another head position within their club. The Vancouver Canucks are in a position where they have this guy, and other teams around the league would be interested in getting him if he leaves Vancouver. And that's not by coincidence. Teams around the league notice that the Vancouver Canucks scouting has been pretty good, and a lot of that does have to do with Judd Brackett. Not even just the later guys, but a lot of the guys that they've been taking early on. PD at 5. Who were the Canucks expected to take at 5? I don't know, Velarde, Glass, Mittelstadt, not Pettersson. Then you take a look at Quinn Hughes at 7. Who would the Canucks have taken then that most people would have guessed? I don't know, probably Bouchard or Dobson. Those were the two names that people were talking about like crazy. Talk about Brock Boeser in 2015, nobody knew who this guy was. Vancouver fans didn't know who this guy was. And all of a sudden, these players have become stars, and a lot of that does have to do with the conversations that Judd Brackett has. So, teams around the league notice that. Teams around the league want this guy. But Jim Benning himself has come out and said that they have offered Brackett an extension, a 2-year extension, while being in negotiations with him. Jim Benning says that he doesn't foresee any problems. Now that to me is a good sign. Obviously, Jim Benning's not going to come out here and say, oh, we do see problems, he's not wanting to resign, but hold your horses, Vancouver Canucks fans. I want to believe that Judd Brackett is going to stay. And sure, there could be some reason for worrying as to why he would want to leave. There could be bigger opportunities. There could be more money on the table. There could be a slew of other teams who are interested in his services, and I don't doubt that. But what use is there for me to sit here worrying about whether or not he's going to come back? Ultimately, I have no control over what is going to happen, but I'm sitting here choosing to believe that he'll come back. Why? Because I'm a Vancouver Canucks fan, and this guy has been on the Canucks for 11 years, and he's been the director of amateur scouting for 5 years. If there's a guy in the organization who has built this team up the way he has, other than Benning, it's Judd Brackett. And to see someone like that leave, it would hurt quite a bit. And it would suck if the Vancouver Canucks were in a position where they let him walk. But ultimately, I think it's going to get done. Rick Dhaliwal said the same thing. He thinks it's also going to get done as well. Jim Benning says he doesn't foresee any problems, and for the most part, the rumblings about him potentially not wanting to come back are, in my mind, a lesser substance than what has come directly from the GM. Obviously, the GM's word shouldn't always be taken as gospel 100% of the time, but I'm choosing to believe it. What harm is there in believing that we will get Judd Brackett re-signed and on this team for the next few years? I don't think there's any harm in believing that, but I will say that if he does leave, that would suck really bad. Oh boy. Even if he does leave though, we've still built such a good prospect pool with him that his work will carry on. For sure it will. A lot of these guys are going to become NHL players, and he was a direct part of that. But, again, I don't want to get into sad talk, don't want to fill you with some bad emotions, bad vibrations, because I still think he's going to remain. Comment down below what you think. He's a really important guy, and Vancouver fans, are very, very lucky to have him. So, I hope you enjoyed this video source of 1299, and bye.